In the spring of 1906, the people of Hollow Creek noticed something strange. Children were going missing. Not just any children, but orphans, mostly the ones who lived along the wooded edge of Cedar Hill, where the fog settled low and the pines grew too close together. The town, nestled in the quiet hills of southern Missouri, wasn't known for much. Just a sawmill, a church, and a small orphanage run by Sister Agnes, a pale and silent woman whose eyes never seemed to blink. At first, the disappearances were blamed on the wilderness, bears maybe, or the river that sometimes took people. But the pattern was too clear. It was always at night, always near the trees, and always without a sound. No scream, no struggle, just a missing child's bed, empty, come morning. Sheriff Redmond didn't want to stir panic, but by the time the fourth orphan went missing, he ordered an informal search party. They found nothing, no tracks, no blood, just rows of identical little boot prints walking out into the trees, and then stopping, as if the forest had swallowed them. Some whispered about the old cave under Cedar Hill, a place the native Osage people once feared. Legends spoke of spirits there, or something worse. But that was just old talk, wasn't it? One boy, 12-year-old Elijah, survived what he later called a calling in the dark. He said he saw a man in a wide-brimmed hat standing under the trees, whistling a tune only children could hear. Elijah didn't remember walking outside. He only remembered waking up at the tree line, frozen, with a handprint on his shoulder, a hand too large to belong to any man. Nobody believed him. But Sister Agnes did, and she began locking the orphanage at sunset. Too late. Another child vanished the next night. By mid-April 1906, Hollow Creek was no longer the quiet town it had always been. Parents kept their children inside. The woods grew darker, even in daylight, and whispers spread faster than the fog. But no one, not even Sheriff Redmond, dared confront the one place everyone silently blamed, the old orphanage beneath Cedar Hill. The building had stood for nearly 40 years, a 2-story stone structure that seemed colder than it should have been. Sister Agnes had inherited it from a group called the Order of Reclamation, a forgotten religious sect that once built churches into caves, believing God's truest voice could only be heard underground. Most of their members had died in a fire decades earlier. The orphanage, people assumed, was just their last remaining shell. But rumors said the basement, sealed shut with iron bars and an old chain, led somewhere deeper. Sister Agnes had her own secrets. Each night, after lights out, she would descend those steps with a lantern and a rusted iron key. Elijah, still shaken from his encounter in the woods, once peeked from the stairwell and swore he heard humming beneath the floor. Low, male, and not human. He told the sheriff. He told the town pastor. He told anyone who would listen. No one did. Because everyone remembered what happened the last time someone pried into the order's business. Back in 1881, a young priest tried to excavate that basement. He'd claimed the order had conducted rituals not fit for heaven or earth. But before he could reveal more, he vanished on the road out of town. The only thing found was his Bible, pages torn and soaked in river mud. Sister Agnes, who never aged, simply resumed her post as if nothing had happened. And the basement remained sealed until that spring, when she unlocked it again. Every child who vanished had been seen in the hallway after midnight. All of them, Sister Agnes insisted, were special. And all of them, she whispered, had been chosen. By the end of that strange April, the number of missing children had reached 7. Each one had vanished from their beds during the night. No signs of struggle, no broken windows, no footprints. Just silence. And always the same thing left behind. A black thread tied around their bedpost. Elijah had noticed it first, on the night Anna Whitford disappeared. She had screamed the day before about the basement, saying she saw a man made of smoke with no eyes. The other children laughed, but Elijah didn't. Not after what he'd seen in the woods. The thread, when touched, burned cold. He tried to show it to Sister Agnes, but she just smiled and said, "The ones who see the thread are the ones meant to follow it." That night, Elijah didn't sleep. He stayed hidden behind a wardrobe with a blanket over his head, listening. At exactly 3:03 a.m., the hallway light flickered, though no one had touched the switch. He peeked out and saw something, a shadow, impossibly tall, gliding without sound past the dormitory doors. It paused at Anna's empty bed, then seemed to melt into the floorboards. The next morning, Sister Agnes declared that Anna had been adopted. No one asked by whom. The children, once loud and restless, now walked with heads down, whispering among themselves. They had started calling the basement the chapel. Elijah overheard two older boys say they heard organ music from beneath the orphanage at night, slow, drawn-out chords that echoed like cries. And then there were the marks. When bathing, Elijah noticed strange bruises forming around his spine, circular, like a brand. At first, he thought he'd fallen in the woods, but when he confided in a girl named Clara, she pulled up her sleeve. She had the same one. "I think we're being marked," she whispered, "like lambs before the slaughter." Sister Agnes, who always seemed to know when the children spoke of forbidden things, summoned Clara to her room that evening. She never returned. And Elijah, now certain that something terrible lay beneath that basement door, knew he was next. Elijah waited until the moon was high and the others had fallen into a frightened sleep. The dormitory air felt heavier now, like something unseen was pressing down from above, or maybe from below. He couldn't stand the waiting anymore. Clara was gone. Anna was gone. The thread was still tied to his bedpost, but now it pulsed faintly in the dark, like a dying ember. He crept out of bed, careful not to wake the others. The orphanage was always silent at night, but this time it felt unnatural, like the building itself was holding its breath. Each floorboard creaked under his feet as he slipped down the stairs. He passed Sister Agnes's room and thought he heard faint humming. Low, almost like a prayer, but not in any language he recognized. Elijah made his way to the hallway near the kitchen, where the forbidden trapdoor lay hidden beneath a faded rug. Every child knew it existed. Every child was told never to touch it. "God's hands sealed that door," Sister Agnes once warned. "Only the chosen may open it." But Elijah was tired of being afraid. He pushed the rug aside and stared at the heavy wooden panel. It looked like ordinary wood, but his fingers tingled when they touched it. Still, he pulled. It groaned open, the hinges shrieking like a wounded animal. A stairway descended into pitch black, colder than anything he'd ever felt. He lit a stolen match. The flame flickered violently, struggling to stay alive. Step by step, he went down. At the bottom was a narrow corridor lined with stone. Strange symbols were scratched into the walls, circles within circles, spirals of nails hammered into bone-colored plaster. It smelled like mold and something else, something iron-like and old. The corridor ended at a massive iron door with no handle, just a circular hole at its center. Inside that hole, something breathed. Elijah leaned closer, heart pounding. That's when he heard it. A whisper not from behind the door, but from inside his own head. A voice without sound, saying just one word. "Welcome." He stumbled back, but the door began to open, slowly, groaning against centuries of rust. And behind it, something moved. The door swung open, not with a jolt, but with a slow, deliberate exhale, as if the earth beneath St. Ives orphanage had been waiting centuries for this very moment. Elijah didn't step back. He couldn't. Some force gripped his chest, not fear, not courage, but the gravity of something older than both. Behind the iron door lay a chamber built from stone blacker than night, smooth like glass but cold like death. A faint red glow pulsed from the ceiling. No lanterns, no fire, just light, as if the walls themselves bled memory. Elijah stepped inside. The door shut behind him without a sound. The chamber was circular, massive, and impossibly silent. But what caught his eye first were the carvings, names etched along the walls, one after the other, thousands of them, curling in a perfect spiral from the floor up to the dome above. Each name was carved deep, and under each a date, some from decades past, some from only weeks ago. His eyes froze when he saw one near the base. Clara Evans, March 3rd, 1902. He choked down a sob. She had been here. She was still here, just not alive, not as he remembered her. He stepped closer, running his fingers across the letters. They burned, literally burned. He pulled his hand back to see fresh blisters forming. Behind him, the whisper returned. Not words this time, just a suggestion of thought, like something brushing his soul. He turned around slowly. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, and upon it, a book. Not dusty, not old, fresh, open, waiting. He walked toward it, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. There were only 3 names written on the open page. Anna May, April 2nd, 1902. Elijah Warren, April 3rd, 1902. And beneath that, a 3rd name slowly etching itself into the page as he watched. Peter Lang, April 4th, 1902. Peter was still upstairs. The ink wasn't ink. It was thick, black, and still he turned to run, but the door was gone, not closed, not hidden, gone, replaced by smooth black wall. And in the silence, he heard 100 names whispering from the stone around him, each one begging to be forgotten. Above ground, Peter Lang stirred in his sleep, tossing in the dusty bed of dormitory B. A faint chill danced over his skin, not the chill of open windows or desert air, but the kind that feels like someone standing too close, watching. He sat up. Silence. The kind of silence that feels alive. He looked around the room, still empty except for a crooked rocking horse in the corner and the broken window behind it. Elijah still hadn't returned. The old place creaked and groaned like it always had, but something was wrong. The air felt too heavy, too still. Then he heard it. A knock, beneath the bed. Not loud, just deliberate. He froze. Another knock. 2 this time. Then 3, like a code or a warning. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, heart pounding. "Elijah?" he whispered. Nothing. He dropped to his knees, lifted the tattered bedsheet, and peered into the darkness underneath. There was only wood and dust and scratches, dozens of them. Not normal wear. These were frantic, desperate, all clustered in the center as if someone or something had clawed from beneath. Carved into the floorboards in uneven lines were words barely legible under the grime. "Let us out." Peter stumbled back, the breath stolen from his lungs. Suddenly the rocking horse in the corner creaked. It moved. No breeze, no force. It just rocked. Then came the whispers, not outside, but beneath the floor. Voices like children, like wind trapped in a bottle. Dozens of them, weeping, laughing, chanting. Then they said his name. Peter. Not screamed, not hissed, just whispered with cold affection. Peter, he's gone. He left you. He covered his ears, backing into the corner. Elijah is one of us now. His vision blurred. The walls felt like they were closing in. Then, he noticed something new. The floorboards near the scratches were slightly lifted, like a hatch. His trembling fingers reached toward it, and just before he pulled, the whispers stopped. Dead silence. Then, one final voice, sharp, clear, and not a whisper at all. "Open it." Peter's fingers hovered over the warped edge of the floorboard. That voice, sharp and calm, still echoed in his ears. Not like the whispers. It was commanding, as if it had been waiting for him. He should have run. He knew it. But instead, he pried his fingers beneath the hatch. Dust poured into the air as the old wood cracked and lifted. The hinges groaned. No nails, just time holding them in place. What he revealed wasn't a crawl space or storage cellar. It was a tunnel. A long, narrow shaft cut into the dirt, reinforced with rotting planks, wide enough for a child, maybe two. The air that wafted up was thick and sour, the kind that smelled of wet earth and something much older, something that shouldn't be disturbed. Still, Peter leaned closer, his ears straining. Footsteps, not up top, below, then humming, a nursery rhyme, slow and sweet, but sung out of tune like a broken music box. And behind that, giggling, childlike, playful, but wrong. "Elijah?" Peter called down. The humming stopped. A pause. Then a voice answered, light, cheerful. "I found the others." Peter felt the blood drain from his face. That was Elijah's voice, but it was off, hollow, like he was repeating something he didn't understand. He called again, louder this time. "Where are you?" But there was no reply. Instead, a scraping sound echoed up the tunnel, as if fingers, not boots, were climbing up toward him. Panicking, Peter stood to slam the hatch closed. But it wouldn't budge. The wood had gone stiff, heavy. He threw his weight on it. Still no use. Then, from the darkness below, a pale hand reached out and pressed against the edge. Small, child-sized. The nails were broken. The skin was cracked and pale as candle wax. Peter screamed, scrambling backward across the floor. The hand didn't reach farther. It just rested there, gently, almost lovingly. Then it tapped 3 times, as against the wood. Knock, knock, knock. Peter stood frozen as another voice whispered from the tunnel. Not Elijah's this time, but older, feminine. "I told them not to dig here," it said. "They never listened." By the time Peter stumbled out of the root cellar, the midday sun had turned the dirt fields into a haze of gold, but he couldn't feel the warmth. His shirt clung to his back with cold sweat, his hands trembled, and every time he blinked, he saw that pale hand pressing against the underside of the hatch, gentle, almost playful, like it had been waiting just beneath the surface for years. He didn't tell his mother, didn't tell the sheriff, didn't even tell Elijah's grieving parents. Because something inside him knew. If he talked about what was under that floorboard, it would hear him. Instead, Peter returned home and tried to forget. But Cedar Grove didn't let anyone forget. 2 days after Peter's discovery, 3 more children vanished, this time all siblings from the Orphan family. Their mother had sent them to gather kindling at the tree line before supper. They never came back. The town searched until dawn again. The woods echoed with lantern light and shouting voices, but there was no trace, no footprints, no torn fabric, not even a dropped twig. Just silence. And at the center of it, the Morgan barn, sitting there like it always had, quiet and watching. Peter avoided it. He avoided Elijah's name, avoided the other kids too. But the nightmares didn't care. He began to dream of the hatch, always slightly open. Sometimes the humming returned, sometimes the tapping, but more and more he saw them. the pale children, their skin dry and cracked, like bark peeled from a dead tree, their mouths stitched shut with old thread, their eyes wide open, unblinking. They didn't chase him. They just stood in the field, facing the house, and waited. One night, Peter bolted upright in bed, heart racing, ears ringing. There was no thunder, no wind, just the slow creak of a door opening downstairs. And then, that same soft voice from the tunnel, whispering from the stairwell. "You opened the door, Peter. You brought them back." Peter didn't scream. He wanted to, God knew he did, but something inside told him that screaming would only make it worse. So he sat there, frozen in his bed, staring at the doorway, waiting for the voice to return. But it didn't. Just silence. Then the faintest sound of bare feet retreating down the stairs. Soft, careful, as if something was trying not to wake the rest of the house. By morning, Peter's mother found him asleep on the floor of her room, curled up beside her dresser, pale as chalk. She didn't ask questions, just pulled him up, fed him toast, and sent him to chop firewood. Everyone in Cedar Grove had learned not to ask questions. But Peter couldn't pretend anymore, not after that night. Something was wrong with the barn. And maybe Elijah had known. Maybe all the missing kids had known. Maybe they hadn't just vanished. Maybe they'd been called. So Peter did the one thing everyone had warned him never to do. He went back. It was dusk again, the time when the barn looked least like a place and more like a shadow pretending to be a building. The wooden beams groaned in the cooling air as Peter crept through the tall grass, lantern in hand. He didn't go to the hatch this time. He went to the east wall, where the oldest timber had long since grayed. He pressed his ear to the boards and listened. And for the first time, he didn't hear humming or tapping. He heard breathing, deep, slow, rhythmic, like something massive was asleep just beyond the wall. He stepped back, heart pounding, when he saw it, a small handprint on the wood. But it wasn't dusty. It was wet, and still glistening. And beside it, etched into the timber, barely visible in the dying light, 3 words carved by something small and frantic. We fed it. Peter couldn't sleep that night, not even in the safety of his mother's room. Every creak of the house made him jump. Every gust of wind that shook the shutters felt like something trying to claw its way in. He stared at the ceiling and repeated the words in his head like a curse. We fed it. Who? Who had fed it? Elijah? The other boys? The townsfolk? The next morning, Peter made a decision. If no one would give him answers, he'd find them himself. He snuck a spade from behind the shed and waited until noon, when everyone was either at work or too busy to notice. He returned to the barn, but this time he didn't go inside. Instead, he walked around the back to the soft patch of soil near the east side where the grass never grew right. He'd noticed it before. His grandfather once told him that the ground there had never been right since the first frost of '87. Don't poke where you don't belong, he had warned, but that was before Peter heard the breathing. Now he had to poke. He plunged the spade into the earth. It gave easily, the soil oddly loose, like it had been disturbed too many times before. After only a few feet of digging, the blade struck something solid. He dropped to his knees, hands clawing at the dirt. What he uncovered made his stomach twist. A wooden box, no bigger than a child's coffin. And inside, it wasn't a child. It was bones, dozens of them, some small, some snapped in unnatural ways, bits of cloth, a rusted shoe buckle, a lock of hair still braided neatly. He reeled back, horrified. But then he saw it, something tucked between the bones, a ribbon, pale blue, torn, stained, but familiar. It had belonged to a girl named Lillian Hayes. She'd gone missing 3 winters ago. Everyone had said she'd run off to Carson City with a traveling salesman. But Peter knew now. She never left town. She never even left the barn. Peter sat frozen beside the open box, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His fingers trembled, still caked in dirt. That ribbon. He remembered it so clearly. Lillian Hayes had worn it every Sunday to church. She used to sit 2 pews ahead of his family, her golden hair tied back with it like something out of a painting. She'd smiled at him once, just once, and he'd never forgotten. Now here it was, tucked between the remains of God knows what. The air around him felt heavy, thicker than it had before. His heart pounded so hard in his chest, it made his ears ring. Peter looked over his shoulder, half expecting someone to be standing there, watching him. But there was no one, only the barn, and the silence. He closed the box slowly, careful not to disturb the bones more than he already had. He tried to stand, but his legs didn't want to move. Something deep inside him whispered to run, to get far away from that hole, from that cursed land, from everything. But something else whispered louder, "Keep going." So he did. He dug again, a foot to the left of the first box. He didn't know why. He just felt he should. 15 minutes later, he found another, smaller, lighter. Inside, a rusted locket, 2 tiny shoes, and bones so brittle they looked like twigs. He couldn't tell if it had been a boy or girl, just that it was a child, maybe even younger than Lillian. By sunset, Peter had unearthed 4 more, 6 boxes total. And that wasn't counting the impressions in the dirt, indentations like graves long since collapsed. Dozens of them, maybe more. He backed away, his shovel forgotten in the dust. Peter wasn't just standing on a graveyard. He was standing in the middle of a secret burial field, one that had existed long before his family ever laid claim to that barn. And whatever had been buried here, it wasn't done being fed. That night, Peter couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his cot, sweat soaking through his shirt despite the desert chill creeping in through the cracked window. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the boxes, 6 of them, neatly buried like pieces in a terrible puzzle. He kept hearing the sound of bones knocking together, soft and delicate, as if they were trying to whisper something only the dead could understand. By midnight, he gave up on sleep. He lit the old oil lamp in the corner, its glow casting long, crooked shadows across the floorboards of the main house. The silence was too loud. Even the wind had stopped. The only sound was the occasional creak of wood, normal in a house this old, but now it sounded like breathing. That's when he noticed the loose plank in the living room. Not warped, not broken, just slightly raised, like someone had pried it up before and never fully pressed it back down. Peter grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer and wedged it under the plank, lifting it carefully. Beneath it sat a leather-bound book. The cover was cracked, dark with oil, or maybe dried blood. It was hard to tell. He opened it slowly. The pages smelled like mold and smoke. At first, it looked like a farm ledger. Lists of supplies, tools, animal feed. Then the entries changed. They became colder. June 2nd, 1892. Girl wandered too close to barn. Ribbons pretty, buried deep. October 15th, 1893. Second box complete. No witnesses. Wind strong that night. Each page after that was worse. Names, descriptions, measurements, age estimates, burial notes. Box 6, Box 7, Box 8, dozens. Peter dropped the book as if it had burned him. He backed away, his mouth dry, heart racing. Who had written it? His grandfather died in 1887. His father never mentioned anything like this. And yet, there it was. in his family home, hidden beneath his feet all these years, Peter Rios realized then. This wasn't just a story of buried strangers. It was his legacy, and whatever his family had been hiding, it wasn't finished unraveling. The next morning, Peter didn't tell anyone about the ledger. Not his neighbor, not the sheriff, and especially not June, the local historian who had offered to help him research the property's past. He wasn't ready to speak the truth aloud, because saying it, naming what he had found, would make it real, would make his family's name echo with blood, not legacy. But the house already knew. As he moved through the rooms that day, the floor groaned differently under his feet. The walls seemed closer, the hallway darker, and at noon, when he entered the attic to pull down old crates, he saw something that hadn't been there before. A child's shoe, perfectly clean. He hadn't stored it. It wasn't dusty. It looked recent. Peter stared at it for a long time, then backed away. He didn't touch it. That night, the dreams came again, but they were no longer his. He was seeing through someone else's eyes. A man with a limp and soil-stained hands, a hand-drawn map, the cracking of young bones, the sound of hammering wood in the dark. He woke up choking. It was becoming clearer now. The ledger wasn't just a record, it was a confession. Or worse, a guide. Peter returned to the book by lantern light. Page 87 was different. It had a sketch, hand-drawn in black ink, a basement that didn't exist, or so he thought. He ran his fingers along the baseboards of the house until he found it, a seam in the wood, too clean, too deliberate, behind the shelf in the pantry. With trembling hands, he pulled the shelf away and found a door. A trap door. There was no handle, just a recessed iron ring. When Peter pulled it open, cold air rushed out like breath. The ladder descended into pitch black. He hesitated, but only for a moment. Then he began to climb down, each creaking rung a descent deeper into whatever truth the house had buried. And above him, faintly, the walls groaned, like they missed the secrets once kept inside. Peter's boots hit the dirt floor with a soft crunch. The air was different down here, stale, damp, and oddly metallic. He held the lantern out in front of him, its flickering light revealing a low, narrow corridor carved crudely through earth and stone. It didn't look like any part of the original house plan. This was older, primitive, meant to be hidden forever. He walked slowly, careful not to touch the walls. Strange markings had been etched into the packed dirt, symbols he didn't recognize. Some were faint, others deep, as though carved in anger. A set of initials stood out on the right wall. CM. He froze. Caleb Maddox, the town's founding father, and the man June believed had disappeared mysteriously in 1903. Peter pressed on. The corridor widened into a chamber, and there, in the center, was a long wooden table, blackened with age and warped by time. On it lay dozens of rusted tools, bones, and brittle strands of hair. Beside it, a pile of small shoes and children's clothing, carefully folded, preserved, as if they had once belonged to someone loved. Peter stumbled back and nearly dropped the lantern. The room smelled like iron and sorrow. On the far wall, he saw shelves lined with leather-bound books, not ledgers, journals, dozens of them. Some dated as early as 1871. Each bore a name on the spine. Peter took one down at random. The handwriting was sharp, disciplined. It read, Entry 19. The cleansing of Sarah D. was completed at dawn. She wept throughout. The cries pleased him. He slammed the book shut. This was no accident. This was doctrine, a ritual, passed down, recorded, obeyed. Suddenly, a creak echoed behind him. Upstairs. Peter froze. Someone, or something, was in the house, and the trapdoor was still open. He extinguished the lantern instantly and crouched in the dark, his breath held in his throat. A shadow passed above, then another. Memories. Not ghosts. People. Someone else had read the ledger. Someone else knew what was hidden beneath the house. And they had come back to finish what had once begun. The black ledger wasn't history. It was still in use. Peter crouched in silence, every heartbeat thudding like thunder in his ears. Dust rained down from above with each footstep creaking across the floorboards. There were at least 2 people upstairs, maybe 3, moving with a careful, deliberate slowness. Not burglars, not random trespassers. They knew exactly what they were looking for. He remained motionless, tucked into the shadow of the chamber wall, barely breathing. His fingers gripped the spine of the journal he'd just read. Entry 19. That one name, Sarah D. Just one of many, it seemed. He dared a glance toward the shelves. Dozens more. All names, all stories, all offerings? A soft scraping sound broke the silence. The trapdoor above began to close. No, 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 Peter whispered, too low to be heard. A dull thud. Darkness. He was sealed in. Peter held back a scream. He reached into his satchel for his flashlight. Thank God for backup batteries. With a trembling thumb, he flicked it on. The beam cut through the dark and landed on something he hadn't seen before. Another doorway at the back of the chamber, partially hidden behind stacked wooden crates. The walls around it were reinforced with timber beams, newer than the others, recent construction. He pushed forward, heart racing. Beyond the doorway was a small alcove, and inside it a pedestal. Upon it sat a single item, a black-bound ledger, larger than the rest, wrapped in twine. The air felt colder in here, as though the earth itself resented the book's existence. Peter untied the twine. The first page was blank. The second held a single line. To those who continue the covenant, record thy deeds in his name. Every page after was filled. Names, dates, ages, manner of death, rationale, from 1871 all the way to 1994. Peter felt his stomach turn. This wasn't a relic of a forgotten past. This was an ongoing practice. The town hadn't forgotten the ledger. They were still adding to it. A sound behind him. A whisper. Do you seek him too? Peter turned, light shaking wildly, only to find a face in the shadows. Not a stranger. The librarian. Mrs. Ellison, holding a match, smiling. Mrs. Ellison's face glowed orange from the flickering match she held between 2 fingers, as though she were toying with the idea of burning the entire chamber down, or perhaps just lighting Peter's final moments. Her smile was calm, almost grandmotherly, but her eyes, they carried something ancient, something hollow. You should not have come here, she whispered, not angry, more disappointed. But curiosity is a fire, isn't it? And fire spreads. Peter instinctively took a step back, the ledger still in his hands. What is this? Why are these names still being written? These people, he choked. They're dead, murdered. Mrs. Ellison let the match burn until it almost touched her fingers. Then, with a single breath, she extinguished it. Darkness swallowed the space again, leaving only Peter's flashlight. She didn't answer right away, just stepped into the beam, slow and purposeful. We call it stewardship, she said softly. We keep balance. We preserve. For over a century now, our little town has lived free from plague, from famine, from the rot that eats at others. And he, she gestured to the chamber walls, he rewards our offerings. Peter blinked. He? Mrs. Ellison leaned in. The Watcher, the one beneath, the Black Root. Peter's brain screamed at him to run, but his legs didn't move. It was the same feeling he had reading those journals, the slow crawl of insanity trying to grip his mind. And Sarah D., Rebecca V., children, all of them. Yes, she said, with genuine sorrow in her voice. But understand, Mr. Whitlow, they were chosen, just as you have now been chosen. Peter's body jolted backward, and the ledger dropped from his hands. It hit the stone with a heavy thump, pages fanning open around his feet. Footsteps behind him now, more than one. Others had entered. The townspeople. He was surrounded. The flash of pitchfork metal. The scrape of booze. Mrs. Ellison gave him a gentle nod. It's better if you don't fight. We never liked when they fought. Peter turned, flashlight trembling in his hand, every thought in his mind roaring for an escape. But the walls had closed in. There were no exits anymore, only initiations. Peter's scream never made it to the surface. The chamber's stone walls seemed to swallow the sound like a mouth. As the townspeople closed in, their faces were blank, not cruel, not joyous, just resigned, like mourners at a funeral they had attended too many times. A pair of strong hands seized Peter from behind, dragging him across the cold floor toward the circular dais in the center of the chamber, the same dais described in the ledger, the one stained black where blood had been spilled for decades, maybe centuries. His flashlight clattered somewhere in the dark, extinguished by a boot. Above him, an iron ring embedded in the ceiling held leather straps, a ritual harness. Wait, please. I'm not one of you, Peter gasped, struggling. I don't even believe in any of this. That's never mattered, a man murmured above him. Belief is irrelevant to the Black Root, only obedience. Mrs. Ellison stepped onto the dais, holding a small, ornate knife. It gleamed, not with blood, but with age. Every notch in its hilt represented a name in that ledger, hundreds of names, hundreds of offerings. She looked down at Peter, her voice strangely tender. You came here seeking truth. That's the only reason the Black Root listens to anyone new. Curiosity feeds it. And now, your truth becomes our truth. Peter thrashed. You're insane. You're all... A cloth was shoved in his mouth. Chanting began. Low, breathy syllables in a tongue Peter had never heard before. It didn't sound like a human language. It was wetter than words should be, like the voice of something that breathed beneath the earth. Then the walls began to shake. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The stone beneath Peter grew hot, pulsing like flesh. Something alive was beneath the chamber floor. Something listening. Mrs. Ellison pressed the knife's tip to Peter's chest, just enough to draw the first drop. And then everything stopped. A second voice echoed from behind the circle of cultists. It was young, terrified. Get away from him! The townspeople turned in unison. Peter turned his head too, blood beginning to bead. There in the entrance stood Abigail, the girl he thought was lost, holding his dropped flashlight like a weapon. Her small hands shook, but her eyes glared fire. She had followed him, and the ritual had just changed. Abigail's defiance stunned the chamber into silence. For a brief, breathless moment, no one moved. The flashlight in her trembling hands cast wild shadows across the stone, illuminating the stunned faces of the cult. Ordinary people transformed into something monstrous by the secrecy of ritual. Peter's heart pounded, not from the knife still at his chest, but from the sight of her. She was supposed to be gone, taken by the town, erased like the others. Yet here she stood, alive, defiant, and very much changed. Step aside, child, Mrs. Ellison said softly, her voice losing its sweetness. You were not meant to return. I remember everything now, Abigail said. The cellar, the fire, my parents screaming. You thought I forgot, but I didn't. You made me forget. The townspeople stirred. Whispers like dry leaves scraped across the walls. Abigail had spoken the one forbidden truth: memory. And that threatened everything. The knife lifted from Peter's chest, but not in mercy. Mrs. Ellison turned her attention to Abigail, stepping down from the dais. "If you remember, then you must choose. Join us, or feed it." "I choose them," Abigail spat. "The ones you buried." Her foot slammed down on the dais stone. A sound cracked beneath them, not from her, but from below. The chamber's floor pulsed, groaned. A crack split the circle. Dust erupted as an old pressure surged from deep underground. The Black Root had been summoned too many times, and this final ritual, interrupted, challenged, had broken its pattern. From the fissure, a stench of rot and damp soil poured upward. The air turned thick, sour, heavy with age. A distant, guttural sound rumbled from beneath the earth, as though the land itself were waking with a growl. Some cultists screamed and ran. Others fell to their knees, chanting louder, hoping to calm whatever had been disturbed, but the balance was gone. Pete pulled his wrists free of the loosened straps. He stumbled from the dais, grabbing Abigail as the stone beneath them began to tremble violently. "You're alive," he whispered. "And so are they," she said, her eyes shining with a terrifying truth. "And they're not done with this town." Then the floor cracked wide open. The moment the chamber split open, the screams of the faithful were drowned beneath the deafening roar of collapsing stone. The sacred floor gave way to an ancient cavity, an enormous, pulsating hollow beneath the town that had never been meant to see the light. Peter and Abigail tumbled backward as the dais crumbled into the pit, taking Mrs. Ellison with it. Her scream cut off abruptly as she disappeared into the darkness below, swallowed by the very force she'd spent decades summoning. The remaining cultists scattered in a blind panic, some tripping into the abyss, others scrambling up the stone steps toward the trapdoor above, their chants devolving into meaningless animal cries. But Peter didn't run. Neither did Abigail. They stood at the edge, peering down into the pit that had opened like a mouth. What they saw was not fire. It was not hell in the traditional sense. It was worse, something primal, something before memory. The walls of the cavern shimmered with veins of black slime, pulsating like arteries. Dozens of forms, half buried, twitching, hung suspended along the sides, some human, some grotesquely altered, fused to the root-like tendrils snaking from the chamber walls. These were the forgotten, the ones who had vanished without a trace. Abigail clutched Peter's hand. This is what they fed it. Not just bodies, souls. And then they saw it. From the far end of the cavern, rising slowly like a tower of sinew and root, came the Black Root itself. It had no eyes, no mouth, just a cluster of gnarled, blackened limbs reaching skyward as if groping for the town above. Its surface crawled with twitching faces, frozen in agony, voices without sound. Peter stepped back, pulling Abigail with him. "We have to seal it. This thing. It was never meant to be unearthed." But sealing it meant destroying the chamber, and the church above, maybe the town itself. And these. Town, even now, had no idea. As the root began to rise, stretching higher into the chamber, the ground shook with the force of ancient hunger. And it was no longer satisfied with offerings. It wanted all of them. The bells of St. Mark's rang for the final time that night, not with a hymn or a call to prayer, but as their tower collapsed inward, crumbling into the earth like a dying tree. The entire congregation hall groaned, split, and then imploded into the pit below, taking pews, stone, and stained glass into the abyss. Peter and Abigail had made their choice. They had reached the bell tower moments before the full collapse. Peter, with trembling hands, struck the base of the load-bearing pillar with a stolen lantern, igniting the soaked wooden beams they'd doused in kerosene. The fire spread quickly, climbing the dry support walls like it had been waiting for this. Below, the black root thrashed violently as the stone ceiling rained down upon it. Dust and flame mingled with the screams of what few cultists remained. The ancient thing, angry, alive, aware, lashed out with tendrils, dragging the last faithful down with it as centuries of secrecy and ritual collapsed above. And then, silence. A stillness so absolute it felt cosmic. By dawn, half of Ashford had gathered at the smoking crater where St. Mark's once stood. Townsfolk gawked, whispered, wept. No one had any answers. The fire had been blamed on faulty lantern oil. The disappearances, chalked up to superstition, wild animals, or transients. The town needed comfort more than truth. Peter and Abigail stood together at the edge of the crowd, dust-covered, burned, bruised, but alive. They said nothing. What could they say? The bodies would never be found. The truth, if spoken, would never be believed. And the root? Buried, yes, but destroyed. They weren't sure. Peter kept a fragment of the black bark that had broken free during the collapse, hard as obsidian, but pulsing faintly when held too long. He wrapped it in cloth and hid it away, vowing never to touch it again. Ashford healed over time. New businesses arose. Pained, new families moved in. The crater was eventually filled and paved over. A school now sits where the church once stood. Children laugh and run across the grass, never knowing what lies buried beneath their feet. But sometimes, just sometimes, those who walk past the school late at night swear they hear faint singing coming from beneath the ground, like a choir still echoing from the dark. And the earth, ever so slightly, still breathes.